In the quiet suburbs of Maplewood, I constructed a life that many would envy. I held a stable position as a marketing executive, lived in a lovely home, and was married to a beautiful woman named Sarah. We had been together for 7 years, and while the initial spark of our romance had dulled over time, I believed that our foundation was still strong. However, I began to notice something troubling. Sarah had started to reject intimacy. At first, I dismissed it as a passing phase. Perhaps she was stressed from work or overwhelmed by the responsibilities of raising our 2 children. As weeks turned into months, however, the emotional distance between us grew palpable. We used to share everything, late-night conversations about our dreams, and passionate embraces that felt endless. Now, silence hung between us, a stark contrast to the closeness we once enjoyed. Whenever I reached out to her, she often turned away, a gentle but unmistakable sign that our relationship was faltering. One evening, after another unsuccessful attempt to connect, I found myself sitting on the edge of our bed, grappling with a deep sense of desperation. I didn't want to believe that our love was fading, but it felt like I was holding on to a thread that was slowly unraveling. Finally, I resolved to confront Sarah about my feelings. "Honey, is everything okay? I feel like we've drifted apart," I said gently, trying to keep my tone light despite the weight of my words. She sighed deeply, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I'm just tired, that's all. You know how it is with the kids and work," she replied, her response vague and evasive. I could sense her reluctance to delve deeper into the issue, and my heart sank as I realized she was unwilling to engage. As days turned into weeks, I felt increasingly isolated. To cope, I sought refuge in my work, often staying late to avoid returning home. My hours filled with meetings and projects, but each moment spent away from Sarah felt like a wound that wouldn't heal. The longing for intimacy grew stronger, morphing into a gnawing ache inside me. I was still attracted to her, still loved her deeply, but the sting of rejection was becoming unbearable. During a lunch with a friend, I poured out my heart about the situation. Mark listened intently, his brow furrowed in concern. "Dude, you need to do something about it. You can't just let it go on like this. Maybe she needs a little push to remember what you two used to have." His words resonated with me, stirring a realization that I hadn't considered before. That night, I returned home with newfound determination. I planned a surprise getaway for the 2 of us, hoping to rekindle the flame that once burned so brightly. I booked a cozy cabin in the woods for the weekend, envisioning a setting where we could escape the chaos of daily life and reconnect. When I presented the idea to Sarah, her face lit up for the first time in ages. "Wow, that sounds amazing. Just the 2 of us?" she asked, her excitement palpable. "Yes, just us, no kids, no distractions," I replied, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time in months. We set off on a Friday afternoon, the crisp autumn air invigorating us as we drove into the mountains. The cabin was rustic and charming, nestled among tall pines, complete with a crackling fireplace and a stunning view of the lake. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, I felt a surge of optimism. That evening, we sat by the fire, sharing stories and sipping wine while the flames danced. I leaned in closer to Sarah, yearning to relive the intimacy we once shared. However, as I tried to initiate a kiss, she pulled away gently. "I'm sorry, I'm not in the mood," she said softly, her eyes cast down. Frustration welled up inside me, but I chose to remain calm. "Sarah, we're here to reconnect. Can't we at least try?" I pleaded, hoping to break through the wall that had formed between us. She looked at me, sadness in her eyes. "I know, but I feel overwhelmed. I don't know how to fix this." A mix of empathy and irritation surged within me. How could we mend our relationship if we didn't discuss it? Yet, as I looked at her, I realized that pushing her would likely create even more distance. That night, we lay in silence, each of us lost in our thoughts. The next day, I made the decision to take matters into my own hands. I could no longer sit back and watch my marriage crumble. It was time for me to regain my sense of fulfillment. After all, I had needs too. I began to flirt with the idea of seeking intimacy outside of my marriage, contemplating whether a new connection might reignite the spark I craved. Although I didn't want to cheat on Sarah, I felt an overwhelming urge to feel desired again. Before long, I found myself chatting with a woman named Lisa online. She was vibrant, funny, and full of life, everything that felt missing in my own relationship. Our conversations quickly turned flirty, offering a glimpse of the excitement I had been longing for. As I communicated with Lisa, I felt a thrill that I hadn't experienced in years. Our late-night text exchanges were filled with discussions of our dreams and desires, and she became the embodiment of everything I craved: attention, validation, and intimacy. I was acutely aware that I was walking a dangerous line, but the adrenaline rushing through me made me feel more alive than I had in a long time. One evening, when my wife Sarah was out with friends, I made the impulsive decision to meet Lisa for a drink. The thought of betraying my wife crashed over me in waves of guilt, but I brushed those feelings aside, convincing myself that I needed this moment for my own happiness. As I entered the bar, my heart raced with anticipation. When I saw Lisa in person, she was even more captivating than I remembered. Her laughter was infectious, and we talked for hours. In that moment, I felt a connection that had been absent from my marriage for years. We shared secrets, dreams, and laughter, everything that had been missing in my relationship with Sarah. Before I knew it, I leaned in for a kiss, and as our lips met, the world around us faded away. In that fleeting moment, all my worries vanished. I felt alive and exhilarated. However, as I drove home that night, a heavy weight settled in my chest. I had crossed a line, and I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. Despite the thrill of the evening, I was still married to Sarah, and I loved her. Yet the distance between us felt insurmountable. When I returned home, I found Sarah asleep on the couch, her face illuminated softly by the glow of the television. Guilt washed over me like a tidal wave. How could I betray her like this? In that moment, I realized that I was running away from my problems instead of facing them. I needed to confront the issues in my marriage head-on. The next morning, I sat down with Sarah at breakfast, my heart racing with anxiety. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite my trembling hands. Concern etched itself onto her face as she pushed her plate aside and looked up at me. "What's wrong?" she asked. I took a deep breath, knowing I had to be honest with her. "I've been struggling with our intimacy issues, and I want to understand why. I want to fix this. But I also made a mistake. I met someone while trying to cope with my feelings, and I kissed her." The confession hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and ominous. Sarah's face paled, and tears welled in her eyes. "How could you do this? After everything we've been through?" Her words cut deep, and I felt the weight of my actions crash down on me. "I know I hurt you, and I'm so sorry. But I need you to understand that I was lost. I didn't know how to reach you, and instead of fighting for us, I took a wrong turn." For a moment, silence enveloped us. I could see the hurt and betrayal reflected in her eyes, but I also saw something else, a flicker of understanding. "I felt so alone too," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I didn't know how to tell you. I thought if I kept pushing you away, it would somehow make it easier. I didn't want to hurt you." As we continued to talk, layers of our hearts began to peel away. We shared our fears, insecurities, and the loneliness that had seeped into our marriage. I learned about the pressure Sarah faced, balancing her job and motherhood, while she discovered my own struggles with intimacy and connection. The conversation lasted for hours, raw and honest. We cried, we yelled, and eventually, we began to listen to one another. Slowly, the walls that had built up between us started to crumble. It was a long and painful process, but we were finally beginning to see each other again. By the time the sun began to set, we had made a pact, a commitment to work on our marriage together. We understood that it wouldn't be easy, but we were willing to put in the effort. We decided to seek couples therapy, recognizing that we needed professional help to navigate our way back to each other. As the weeks passed, we embraced this challenge. The therapy sessions opened our eyes to the patterns we had fallen into, teaching us healthier ways to communicate. We began carving out time for each other, rediscovering the intimacy we thought was lost forever. Slowly but surely, our marriage began to transform. We laughed together again, went on dates, and even tried new activities. With every small step, we rebuilt our connection, brick by brick. The journey wasn't without setbacks, but we faced each challenge as a team, united in our desire to heal. Months later, as we celebrated our anniversary, I looked at Sarah and felt a surge of gratitude. We had navigated the storm together, and although it had been a painful journey, we had emerged stronger than ever. The intimacy we had both longed for was returning, bringing with it a renewed sense of love. That night, we sat by the fire in our living room, reminiscing about the past year. I took her hand, feeling the warmth of her touch. "I'm so glad we fought for each other," I said softly. "Me too," she replied, her eyes shining with happiness. "I think we finally found our way back." As we leaned in for a kiss, I knew that we had weathered the storm together. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was ours. We had learned the importance of communication, trust, and vulnerability. Through the trials we faced, we discovered a love deeper than we ever imagined. As the flames flickered in the fireplace, I held Sarah close, feeling a profound sense of peace. We had taken the time to reconnect, and in doing so, we had rekindled not only our passion but also our commitment to each other. It was a new beginning, a second chance to build the life we both dreamed of, hand in hand.